So let's take a look at what's winning tournaments for the forces of the Unforgiven right now, with a look at 5 of the strongest Dark Angels army lists around. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Dark Angels, and in this video I thought we'd take a look at a few of the army lists that have done best for the faction in recent times, and what units a bunch of top players have decided to take to win them victory. Currently at the moment, Dark Angels are doing fairly well in terms of game balance in Warhammer 40k. Around about 50% win rates in Pariah Nexus, so fairly well balanced overall when taken as a whole. Lots and lots of really quite big event wins, so certainly able to compete at the highest level, and actually using their own unique units for power now, with a big focus on things like Inner Circle Companions and Deathwing Knights, as opposed to the previous builds, where they seem to be slightly depressingly using Azrael and Storm Ravens in an Ironstorm list. That 50% win rate maybe obscures things a little bit, in that Gladius is actually doing better than that for the Dark Angels, and basically everything else is doing notably worse. It seems that the Dark Angels' unique elite assault units just get on really well with the Gladius task force, with easy access to advance and charge, a couple of big damage dealer stratagems, and back it up with a scary fire discipline combo. All of those seem to work out really quite well for them. Out of the rest, it seems that most people have been trying to make use of the Inner Circle task force, the one for the Deathwing and the other keyworded units, but despite having a small buff and getting +1 to wound against a whole bunch of things, that one's still doing far worse versus the Gladius, and it seems that the two just don't seem to be particularly well balanced. As mentioned, it's nice to have their new and shiny elites in pride of place on the battlefield. There's still lots of units that you just don't really see at all in competitive play. As we'll see in these army lists, quite a few of the same few datasheets just come up over and over again. Jumping into the army list though, let's start out by taking a look at a couple of Gladius lists that seem to be doing things in a fairly standard sort of way for the Dark Angels, and then 3 lists that do things a bit differently, but also to good success. First up, we've got a Gladius Task Force list. Similar versions of it were run both by Conan Jennings and John Lennon, topping the 129 player Michigan GT and the Crucible GT. The two armies are almost exactly identical, aside from a few swaps of things like plasma pistols to hand flamers and things. Pretty good endorsement that this can absolutely do well if played by someone really good at the game. Leading the list, we have Supreme Grandmaster Azrael, who's really not seen in Dark Angels lists. 105 points for invulnerable saves, sustained hits, and command point generation is all very nice, plus his own melee stats. The fashion with him often tends to be to take him alongside Assault Intercessors, a cheap retinue that enjoys invulnerable save, and he can make some good use out of their reroll wound rolls, and then stay safe for a few turns generating the command points, and then commit to the midfield with a handy bit of objective control in the last few pushes of the game. There's then a Judas here who's joining a unit of Inner Circle Companions, and that makes them a fairly terrifying threat in the midboard with Fight First. In a few army lists they seem to like jumping out of Impulsors. There's just the one Repulsor in this army list, which I guess is probably for the Eradicators. I guess in Gladius foot slogging's a bit more credible though, given that you can advance and charge. Speaking of which, the last HQ is the Apothecary Biologist with Fire Discipline. He's with the Eradicators, and as I said, I suspect in the Repulsor. A big scary shooting bunker to disembark from that can do plenty of its own small arms and las cannon fire, and that means you get a whole bunch of scary melter rifles and multi-melters, all with sustained hits on 5+ in Devastator, also getting lethal hits that way as well. It just means they'll make a mess of anything big and armoured. Just about any vehicle in the game has a good chance of just getting absolutely destroyed by those, and doubly so if they're within melter range. But given the sustained hits, they can be far more of a threat to heavy infantry as well, where Eradicators might often lack the shots a little bit. Then for the big intimidating battle line of the army list, there's 3 units of 5 Deathwing Knights. In this one, 2 squads are taking maces with the anti-vehicle keyword, and 1 is taking power weapons. The Knightmaster's taking the great weapon here. Really hard to go too far wrong with these, given they're just ridiculously tanky, and very strong amount of melee damage after the update. In Gladius, getting advance and charge is a really big deal for them. There could be an option to rapid ingress and make a charge that way if desired as well. Then finally, we've got really quite a lot of objective scoring units. 3 units of 5 jump intercessors with Power Fist and Plasma Pistol. Easy to drop for secondaries and can deal with a bunch of things that maybe the bigger, tougher stuff doesn't really want to go after individually. They can skirmish well against lighter stuff. 1 unit of scouts to hold up the midboard and get some presence there, and then 1 unit of 5 infiltrators that could be tasked to hold the home field objective and deny some all-important deep strike. Overall, it looks really quite intimidating and effective. 4 massive melee threats that you can't really ignore, a ridiculously scary shooting punch in those Eradicators, lots of units for objectives, and Azrael himself to step up and do a bit of work in the late game, and put that sort of secrets to good use. The Inner Circle Companions could be a really big heroic intervention threat as well if they paired with the Deathwing Knights perhaps. That with Fights First and the Judas here could be very scary indeed. To take a look at the first of the datasheets, the Deathwing Knights went from being a little bit take or leave to absolutely auto-include for the majority of Dark Angel's armies recently. They're already very tanky for the cost, 4 wounds with toughness 5, a 4+ invulnerable save, and then -1 damage, so you need a big damage 5 hit past the invulnerable save if you want to kill one outright, and even getting a 4+ save against mortal wounds once per game from the Watcher. For the Sergeant weapon, people tend to prefer the Great Weapon with the access to the devastating wounds and the sustained hits, and then different armies seem to prefer either the Power Weapons or Mace of Absolution. Personally, I slightly prefer the Maces for being a bit more general purpose and well-rounded, but in Gladius the Power Swords can also do pretty well given the access to that Lance and extra AP stratagem. In general, most of these just feel like they're going to be big problem units for the enemy wherever they come, capable of soaking up damage from most units in the game and coming out with enough threats to hit them back hard. For another example of a scary Dark Angels Gladius, there's this list by Cam Hawkins, who used it to take a big 100-player tournament at the Texas Open 24, winning 6 games and losing none. It's interesting to see the similarities and differences with this one. There's some things that are really similar, with the same 3 characters heading up the list, Eradicators with the multi-melters for the Apothecary Biologist again, and it looks like again they're in the Repulsor. But then a few things have been shifted around a bit. There's a pair of Impulsors here to transport the Inner Circle Companions this time around, and there's no Assault Intercessors, so I'm guessing that Azrael is joining the second unit of the Inner Circle Companions. All very nice to give them a 4+ invulnerable save and sustained hits as well as their lethal with their strike attacks. Otherwise there's no Infiltrators but 1 additional unit of Scouts, and there's enough room for 1 unit of 3 Ravenwing Black Knights too. I guess another cheap and effective skirmishing unit that's kind of similar in terms of cost to the Jump Intercessors, so it could be a chapter appropriate rival for that role. Even if they can't deep strike and have a few more issues with terrain, they do have some scary shooting with plasma guns when they need it, I guess. The other really standout datasheets are the Inner Circle Companions for 90 points per 3. They're 3 wound Space Marine veterans without an Inbolt and vulnerable save, but they do get OC2, and then have the choices of 2 fairly nasty damage profiles, either Strike Mode with 4 attacks at Strength 6, AP 2, Damage 2 and lethal hits, quite general purpose there, or having a sweep attack with 5 attacks with sustained hits 2, dropping down to damage 1. Both of those are just quite scary against virtually everything now that they got the AP boost, blending hordes or enemy elites rather nicely, so the right sort of firepower can take them down pretty quickly. Compared with the Deathwing Knights, they need to play a bit cagier, maybe use transports and things like Impulsors, perhaps hide behind terrain and threaten to advance and charge with Gladius. And as we've seen in the last 2 lists, Judiciars seem to be really quite popular in leading them. Fights first on a scary unit like that, brawling in the midboard seems very nasty, plus being able to potentially support other units with heroic intervention and fighting first if needed. Moving on to the next one, and for the last 3 armies, I thought it would be interesting to see a few that aren't quite such a standard pattern Dark Angels list, and this one by Colin Kay, who used it to take first at Rook's 40k Open, a 40-player grand tournament. Certainly feels pretty enormously different to a few of the others, even if it's still using Gladius. There's still our favourite 3 characters in Azrael, the Judiceer and the Apothecary Biologist, but they're also joined by the Primarch himself. Lionel Johnson does occasionally seem to make his way into competitive lists, and can be a really hard model for opponents to know what to do about, in a big model that's loads of value but they won't be able to shoot at long range, and if they get too close or try and charge him, he'll have fights first himself. As well as him, there's not 1 but 3 combi weapon lieutenants, which is kind of mad. Annoying Space Marine operatives that aren't going to be doing too much in terms of actual damage in their own way, but can do things like fade behind ruin walls and allow Lionel Johnson to get his lone operative protection. And then if that weren't enough lone operative, there's also a Phobos librarian as well, looking like he's joining a group of infiltrators, and that means you've got a bunch of 6 models that can't be shot outside of 12 inches, and he can't arrive from reserve within 12 inches, so fairly godly backfield screening if you want it there. Finally, for the HQ section, we've got a librarian as well, the standard one not really often seen in competitive lists. It looks like in this one Azrael's probably going with the Assault Intercessors again, then one of the Inner Circle Companions gets a Judiceer, and the other one gets the regular Librarian to give them a 4+ invulnerable save, which would make them significantly harder for the enemy to take down reliably. With all that good stuff in the HQ section though, it does mean that there's no Deathwing Knights in this one. For the actual big damage dealing infantry threats, there's 2 units of 6 Inner Circle Companions, as said probably with the Librarian and Judiceer, and then Eradicators with multi-melters, which I guess could well be in the Landmaid Redeemer, though I suppose you could fill it full of Inner Circle Companions to get a very long charge off if it made more sense to do that. There's certainly 1 Impulsor here with a Missile Array and Stormbolter. Again, I guess that's probably for Inner Circle Companions, unless Azrael's taking it for a spin. Certainly feels like a very different and very sneaky Dark Angels list though. Likely not a lot of units that the opponent can shoot, with a whole load of things shielded by lone operative, and then the few things that they might be able to target could be ridiculously tough, like that Land Raider Redeemer with Armour of Contempt. It's not like there aren't a whole bunch of massive damage threats in the army as well, with Inner Circle, Lionel Johnson himself, and the Eradicators. Moving on to the next list, and going beyond the Gladius for this one, we've got the Inner Circle Task Force. This was the single best performance for the Deathwing style detachment, at least that I could see since the balance update. And this one was run by a Brass Watson to take second at J-Town Throwdown, going undefeated in a 43-player tournament. It's the one where the core rule gives you +1 to wound against a bunch of objectives that you don't control at the start of the turn, and there's a few interesting options for redeploying Deathwing Terminators about. They've got the rather terrifying option to have a unit turn up first turn with Deathwing Assault, and that could be at a 3-inch deep strike as well, with a 1 command point for Relic Teleportarium. And that certainly seems like it could be pretty problematic for the opponent to drop a bunch of Deathwing Terminators right on the enemy doorstep straight away, or even just to put them down somewhere threatening and have a fairly reasonable chance at a first turn charge, particularly if budgeted for a command reroll. Otherwise they've got some nice ones for extra damage on those vowed objectives. There's a nice toughness one with a -1 to wound for Deathwing Infantry. Putting that all together, and there's 3 units of Deathwing Knights as the absolute focus for this one, 2 with maces and 1 with power weapons. I guess that the power weapons one is going with the Chaplain and Terminator armor for a +1 to wound all the time, which is kind of interesting that they wouldn't be making much use of the actual detachment rule of that setup. One of the other squads seems like it's got the Ancient and Terminator armor with a hammer and shield, and that's got the first turn deep strike. Then there's a single unit of Jump Intercessors, 1 unit of Assault Intercessors with Azrael himself, a Judaseer with Inner Circle Companions again that absolutely could make use of that +1 to wound in a big way, and it would seem that they're being transported in an Impulsor with a shield dome. Then we've got 1 set of Screening Infiltrators, 1 set of Scouts, and then interestingly enough some big guns at the back, 2 Predator Destructors for a bit of general purpose firepower. They both take las cannon sponsons so can deal damage to tanks, and the autocannons can be very nasty against elite infantry with extra AP. In any case, pretty impressive to see someone making good use of this detachment. Not many people have been choosing to. Finally, last but not least, we have another set of perhaps slightly sneakier Dark Angels with a slightly weirder list for them. Interestingly, this one placed second at that Rooks 40k Open tournament that Dark Angels also won, with this Vanguard Spearhead list by James Walsh going 4 wins to 1 loss in a 39-player event. Vanguard Spearhead can give you cover and -1 to hit at long range, and it looks like maybe the Storm Ravens and Redemptor Dreadnoughts are particularly enjoying that in this one, just being quite a lot tougher against shooting out there. And then there's a fair amount of on-foot firepower units and some Inner Circle Companions. It's kind of crazy to see 2 Storm Raven gunships in here and outside of Ironstorm as well. I guess unusually tough in this one, and you could use Armour of Contempt to help them out further. These are equipped with twin plasma cannons, twin multi-melters, hurricane bolters and their missiles. And I guess that they might well be delivering those 2 Redemptor Dreadnoughts, which they could have in the hold. Those are armed with macroplasmas, onslaught Gatling cannons and frag storms. I'm not sure necessarily what's going in the hold of those Storm Ravens for the infantry section, if anything. I guess they could be transporting things like 3 of the Eradicators, or maybe the Devastator squad. The Devastators have a bunch of grav cannons, and that could work out pretty well with the extra AP stratagem that you can get in Vanguard Spearhead. At first impressions, I'd guess that Azrael might have joined them, but it doesn't look like he can by his datasheet, so maybe he's just fielded solo. Otherwise, there's a Judaseer with Blade driven deep. That means that you can have some fights first Inner Circle Companions infiltrating up the board right from turn 1. There's a single Furboss Lieutenant, I guess just being used as a super cheap deep strike unit to do actions and secondaries. As well as the small 3-man unit of Eradicators, there's a big 6-man one as well. And just with the entire formation of Storm Raven Dreadnought plus some Eradicators, that's a ridiculous damage punch there. You could do some seriously scary alpha strikes between all that. In any case, it's certainly a very unusual Dark Angels army list. It feels perhaps a bit more harking back to what they were getting up to with Ironstorm shenanigans prior to the balance update, but I wouldn't be surprised if people just didn't really know how to approach those sort of things. There's a lot of things that you might want to deal with really quite quickly, and a lot of damage dealers that you can get in your face really fast. In any case though, let me know what you make of the Unforgiven army lists out there. Look forward to hearing all your thoughts down in the comments. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep all of these coming. Channel patrons do get a few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, an automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.